Good morning, everyone, and happy Monday. Welcome back to the Adobe XD Daily Creative Challenge, day number 5. My name's Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and a big good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone joining me here live on Behance, including Yuri and Jan, Eric, and Pedro, and Tim, and Jack, and Melville, and Alberto, Ariana, Jason, Charmel... I'm bad with names. I apologize if I mispronounce it. Charmalomplis. It's probably wrong. I apologize. Paco's in the house, Jack Watson, and everyone else joining me live. If you are tuning in, I have... Oh, Jack says I have sound. Okay, I thought you said I have no sound. I was about to freak out. If you are tuning in live, let me know who you are, where you're tuning in from. Wait, hold on. Someone said something else about sound. Jason. Oh no, I hear sound. Okay, I think we're good. So if you're tuning in live, let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm gonna be in San Francisco this week. It's a long story, but I booked my flight originally for tomorrow night, not realizing I have a meeting tomorrow afternoon. So I'm kind of in a weird spot right now. I gotta finish this, fly over or shoot over to the airport and figure that all out. But all right, here we go. We're gonna hop over to my screen. We are going to get going for day number 5. The Behance Daily Creative Challenge landing page is over at behance.net/challenge/XD. You're going to see a big blue register button at the top. If you haven't pressed that yet, definitely press that button so you're notified when we do release new challenges. And if you're brand new to this whole shindig, every single day you're going to receive a challenge. You can join us in our community chat, which is powered by Discord. Here's our Discord server. We have about 32,000 designers in there. You can hop in, you can introduce yourself, you can ask questions, and more importantly, you can share your work. So you can go into the current challenge section and look at all these amazing posts that have been posted by people. I can just scroll on forever. There's a good time. So if you want to give feedback or get feedback, hop in there and have a good time. You can also post if you're working on your past challenges. You can also post in the past challenge section. If you want to post just random bits and pieces of things you're designing, you can do that as well. So what do we have planned for today? Well, last week we started the process, tackling repeat grids, and we designed the donation experience for a buy a book, give a book mobile app. We moved on to auto animate for an experience that rewards users with credits to plant trees in the real world. Then we took a look at the drag trigger. We designed an experience that allows users to donate to charities directly from their paychecks. We looked at plugins for an Amber Alert app, and then today we are going to be diving a little bit deeper and taking a look at component states. And we're going to be designing an experience for either web or mobile, whichever you choose, for a voting experience, which is going to be kind of interesting. And if you want to learn more about component states, or if you want to, really see what's possible, if you head over to letsxd.com/states. I've got a video all about components. I also have a UI kit with a lot of components in there. There's over 200 states, so you can dive in there and really, get going. And Tim will probably post the link in the chat in just a second. All right, let's hop over to Adobe XD. Here is the template for today. We've got our challenge information at the top. Again, is to design an online voting experience for mobile, web, or tablet using component states. And here's some inspiration down here. And originally I was like, oh, it'd be kind of cool to design an experience, for politics to vote on your favorite candidate. But then I realized, no, let's not talk about politics for a little bit. There's a lot of talk about politics. Let's do something fun. So we're going to design something like a food voting application. And, am I that predictable, Tim? Yes, you are, Tim. Or yes, you are. So we're going to design something fun, and it's going to be cute. It's going to be very colorful. It's going to have delicious food. Let's just get politics off our mind for a little bit. So we're going to start by just blocking things out, defining some colors, and then we're going to dive into component states. I want to start by adding a little bit of a gradient to the background of this artboard. And in previous challenges, I stuck with a solid color, but today we're gonna go a little bit crazy, and we are going to, and Jack, I think you're gonna like one of the foods that I chose. We're gonna add some fun color. So I have the artboard selected. Over here to the right, I'm gonna choose my fill, and instead of a solid color, I'm going to choose a linear gradient. And I can change the direction. I might wanna go from the top left over to the bottom right. And Pedro says the UI kit is amazing, great way to reverse engineer the breakdown functions. Yeah, you can definitely dive in there and pick it apart as much as you want to figure out how things were done. And I will be releasing more tutorials on some of the specifics. All right, so we've got our gradient set up. Obviously we need some color, right? So maybe the top left, I'm gonna choose the white, and I might wanna go for, let's say, a nice pink, maybe a little bit desaturated, somewhere right about there. That's a pretty nice pink right about there. And maybe at the bottom, we're gonna go for a nice purple. So I'll go something like this, a little bit desaturated, maybe a little bit more blue, maybe somewhere right about there. All right, perfect. We can always tweak the pinks and the purples and whatever color you want. We can always tweak those later. So we've got our gradient set up. Now we might want some sort of a card in the middle, which is going to house the two foods that we're going to be voting on. So I'm going to choose my rectangle tool and simply draw out a rectangle just like this, somewhere in the middle of my document. Perfect, that looks pretty good right about there. I do want to leave a little bit of room on the sides because I will have additional cards over to the left and the right to give the impression that you can swipe to different foods. So we have that right now. So someone's asking about the political stuff. So you could definitely make a voting experience for politics and candidates and things like that. I'm choosing to go a little bit fun, but you can do it whatever you want. You can do food, you can do politics, you can do sports, whatever. So have fun with it, get creative. So we've got this box in the middle. It looks okay, but I love the rounded corners. So maybe I want to just round at the corners a little bit. I'll go for, let's say, 32 pixels, but maybe just to give it a little bit more style, I might want to hold down my Alt-Option key and maybe just drag this corner in, let's say about 65 pixels, just to make it a little bit more round. Maybe let's say 75. I can also adjust the corner radius over to the right. So if I wanted this one down at the bottom right as well, I can do 75, just to give this card a little bit of flavor, right? So we've got this card going on. Now we might want some actual images inside of the card so we know what we're voting on. So what I could do is I could just duplicate this, Command and Control D, and I'll just change the color so I know what I'm working with, right? And just move this in a little bit, move this up just like that, move it in a touch, and I might need to adjust the rounded corners just a little bit. They don't look too bad, but I might want to just kind of pull this in a little bit to about 65, 64, something like that, 65, 65, and the corners I'm also going to pull in a little bit just so they look nice, and there we go, 25, perfect. All right, so we've got our, maybe this one at the bottom, I'm also gonna have 25. Perfect, all right. So we've got our first card set up. We can just duplicate it. We're gonna hold down Alt-Option, drag this down like this. Obviously we need to make some changes to the rounded corners. So what I'm going to do, I also wanna make sure that everything is lined up really nicely, and I'm holding down Alt-Option to see the spacing and the padding that's surrounding that image. And I'm going to change this to 25. And whoops. My bad. I'm going to change this to 65 and then 25. I completely did that wrong. There we go. 65, 25. Perfect. So we've got our two cards now, which is going to house our images. And of course, we need some images. So I'm going to hop over to Finder. I've got some really colorful images that I might want to use for this. And I'm simply going to grab, let's say, the first image, which is some juice. I'm going to drag this into this card. And I got some donuts, which I know Jack is going to like. I'm going to drag the donuts into the second card. So essentially, we're going to be voting whether we want juice or donuts. And I can just grab my text tool, shortcut key T, and just type in or. I'll just set some, let's say, Poppins is always a good font. Just make this a little bit bigger. And I'll just put this somewhere right in the middle. All right. So we've got things looking pretty good, and drop the opacity just a little bit. And if we have time, I'm going to add some additional elements, but for now, we're going to leave it just as this. Now, down below, we might also want some buttons, and this is where we're going to start getting into component states. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool once again, draw one out just like that. Perfect, that looks pretty good, and maybe a little bit thicker. I'm gonna round out the corners quite a bit, move it up a touch, and then turn off the border for this one at least. Now, for this button, we might want, this is gonna be when you cast your vote. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my text tool. I'm going to type out, cast my vote. Make sure that the text is centered. I'm gonna grab the little handle at the bottom. I'm gonna zoom in so we can see what we're working with. Make sure it's nice and large, just like that. Now, we probably don't want to go with a black weight for this. We actually want to go, let's go for maybe bold. Bold might work a little bit better. And then for the color, I might want to sample one of the colors behind the button. So I'm going to simply press the I key on my keyboard and just click on this purple right here, just so it looks like it's kind of cut out. And that looks pretty good. So we've got this button, but we might want to use several buttons throughout our project. We might also want to create various states for, different variations of our buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of these layers. I can do that in my layers panel or hold down my shift key and click on them on the canvas. And I might want to turn this into a component. So I can do that by right clicking and then make component, or I can do it with the plus button over to the right in the components in the properties inspector, or I can go to my assets panel right over here, and I can press the plus button right over here. So there's lots of ways you can make a component. So I'm gonna press the plus button. I can go ahead and name this button, and now I have a single button. I can very easily drag additional buttons anywhere on my artboard, anywhere on my canvas, doesn't matter where it is, right? So I have a button. But you can also create various states, and this is where states get really exciting. So if I wanted, let's say, an outlined version of this button, over in the right in the properties inspector, I can press the plus button beside the default state. I can create a new state. Of course, you could create a hover state, but for mobile, it doesn't really apply. I'm gonna just name this outlined. And now once that's selected, we can start making changes to define our outlined button. So what I'm gonna do is, let's say I'm gonna dive in here. I'll turn off the fill, just set a border, make the border a little bit thicker, change the text color to white, and maybe this one would say, view my votes, right? And maybe just to get a little bit fancy, I can also change, let's say, the blend mode to overlay for this. And I can also change the blend mode. Let me go back to my layers on the background as well. Just change that to overlay, just so it blends in a little bit with the background. So now we have two buttons. We've got our default state and we've got our outline state. And what's nice is I can just duplicate this downwards and then just choose whichever state that I want, whether it's an outline state or a hover state, whatever it is, I can just choose whichever button I need. And the beauty of states and components is that they all remain linked. So if I did decide that I didn't like the complete rounded corners, I can just dive in, change the corners on one of them, on the master component, and it's going to automatically change it on all of them, including the states which have not been overridden, which is really nice. So we've got things looking pretty good. I'm going to move this up a little bit just to kind of get things looking fancy. Perfect. And let's go ahead and dive in here just one more time. I'm going to type out juice, right? I might want to sample one of these red colors in this juice at the top. We'll go for a nice, what do we go? Thin? No, thin might be too thin. What about light? Light might work. So this will be juice, right? Over here. And then maybe down here, donuts. I'll make sure to right justify this. Maybe I'll go for a nice blue, like one of these blues in the background. Change the color just a touch. That looks pretty good right about there. Pop this somewhere right around here, and I'll just move this so it's kind of lined up. You can also select all of these layers using your shift key, and then use the distribution options at the top. So I'm gonna make sure that they're all nicely distributed horizontally from each other. Perfect. All right, so we've got our basic design set up. And now we want to start working with components to actually define the voting experience. So there are a few ways to do this, but because I want essentially juice or donuts, and I don't want a user to be able to tap on donuts and juice, right? We actually want to convert the entire thing into a component. So I'm going to start by selecting one image here. I'm going to hold down my shift key and select the juice layer, the donuts text layer, and also the donuts image layer. And again, you can do that in your layers panel as well. You can also do it on your canvas, whichever works best. So essentially I have all of these layers selected. I don't really need the or layer selected, so I'll leave that alone. and I want to turn these into a component. So I'm going to hit Command or Control K, boop, there we go. And now I have a single component with all of those layers, and I can see that right in here. So I'm going to type in voting. I'm going to name that component just like that. And now we can start defining our various states, which is going to help us actually create that voting experience. And again, to do that, we're going to do this over here to the right in the Properties Inspector. We're going to press the plus button. We're going to create a new state, and this first state is going to help us, when someone taps on juice, right? Lindsay says, oh my God, a boop graphic. Yes, I have to use that at least once. So this I'm going to call juice. And in this case, I might want, so if a user taps on this, maybe the other option, in this case donuts, gets a little bit grayed out. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in with the juice state selected. I'm going to choose donuts. I'm going to hold down Shift, choose the image, and maybe just drop the opacity. I'll just pop it somewhere around, let's say 40%, right? There we go. So now we have the juice state active and designed. We're going to go back to the default state and simply design the donut state. So just like I did before, make a new state, call it donut. I'm going to dive in, select the juice image layer, the juice text layer, press the number 4 on my keyboard to drop the opacity to about 40%. Press escape to go back to the parent level, and now I have all 3 states ready to rock, right? But of course, we now need to actually prototype these. So if you were designing and creating hover states, those are automatically prototyped. But for regular states with tap triggers, you have to prototype those yourself. And to do that, we're going to go into prototype mode right here at the top. There we go. And now from our default state, we want to define how, let's say, the juice state is activated. So essentially, when a user taps on the juice image layer, something is going to happen. So I'm going to start by double clicking into that component. I have the juice image layer selected. And instead of dragging the blue handle to another artboard like you would have done in the past, because we're wiring up a component to a state, you simply have to tap on it or click on it. Boop, there we go. And now we have this little handle over here sprouting out to the right. And in the properties over to the right over here, you can choose which destination state you want to transition to. And in this case, the juice state, right? And you can choose an action if you wanted to. In this case, we don't really need auto animate because nothing is animating. So I'll choose transition. The animation, probably don't need an animation, so I'll just choose none. That looks pretty good. So now, we can also go to our donut state, do the exact same thing, and just choose donut as the destination, right? It's that simple. And once you really get into the hang of things, your prototyping will be super quick. So now that we have these 2 states defined, we can also define states from, what the animation or what the prototype looks like once you're actually in one of those states. But before I show you that, let's press the play button at the top. And all I have to do now is click on whichever one and let me know in the chat, would you like juice or would you like donuts? But for now, while you're voting, I'm simply going to tap on donuts, and you're going to notice it transitions to that donut state where the juice is, grayed out a little bit. But from here, I can't really click on anything to go anywhere. So what we're going to do is, still within prototype mode, we're going to dive into the individual states, in this case, juice, and we can start defining some additional interactions from here. So if someone taps on the juice image again, once in the juice state, it might go to the default state. And if someone taps on the donuts, it might go to the donut state. We have a lot of donuts. We don't have any juices yet. Yeah, I don't blame you all. Donuts, 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 donuts. And then we can go to the donut state. If someone taps on the donut, it goes to the default state to turn off that vote. And if someone taps on juice, it goes to the juice state. So it's that simple. And again, as you start getting into the rhythm, your prototyping and interactions will come very naturally. We have one for juice, Kara for juice, Pedro for juice, Jofian for juice, juice-filled donut. There we go, Richard. Now we're talking. All right, so we basically have all of our interactions set up. So we have our default state, we have our juice state, we have our donut state, and we have interactions set up from within those different states. So if we press the play button at the top, let me move this over, we've got our app looking fancy, right? So we've got our juice, we can tap on that, which grays out donuts. If someone taps on juice again, both are available. Or if they tap on donuts, they can basically switch between the two different states. And then from there, you know, the sky's the limit, what you can really do. Let me just make a few tweaks to this. I might want to grab the background layer and just move this over. It doesn't have, nothing has to be in there, but just to kind of give users the impression that they'll be able to swipe left or right. And of course, last week, I believe it was on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, I don't know, one of the days, we took a look at the drag trigger. So you can really expand this prototype and have various cards that you can swipe between, and then those states will work beautifully within those cards as well, which is really cool. And what's nice is, let me show you actually, if I grab this, right? I just drag this over to this box here, right? And I go back over to, let me actually move this out just so we can see what we're working with. I hop back over to, let's say, Finder. I might want to drag one of these images in. I might want to drag, let's say, this in. And of course I can change the text and yada, 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 but just for the sake of time, I'll pop this back over here. And now we have an additional card with some additional images, right? So what we could do is we could set up another artboard just like this. We can move this stuff over. Whoops, I missed it. We can move this stuff over like this. Perfect, that looks pretty good, right? And now we can start defining a drag interaction. So if you selected the component, you can drag it over to this side. This will be a drag trigger, auto animate, sure, that looks good. And just drag it over just like that. Of course, I'd have to make sure all the text comes over as well, and the cards and everything looks pretty good, but you can do so much when you combine drag triggers and tap triggers and components and states and that sort of thing. And the last thing I want to show you really wouldn't apply to, let me actually backtrack there we go. All right. There we go, beautiful. So the last thing I want to show you is, again, it doesn't really apply to mobile designs, but if you are designing for a desktop experience, how you can use hover on with states as well. So if you wanted to, you have this button down here, right? You wanted someone to hover over it and it would do something. Something would look a little bit different. What you would do is over to the right, you would press the plus button and you would choose a hover state. And it does have the lovely little lightning icon over to the right, which does let you know that this will be wired up by default. So you don't have to go into prototype mode and do your thing. So I'm going to press on hover state. I'll just name it hover state. And now I can define what that hover state looks like. So maybe the text will get a little bit larger, just like that. Maybe the background will dim a touch, just like that. Nothing too crazy. You don't want to overdo it with your hover states, but you could get really interesting because auto animate works really well with hover states. You could have some really interesting interactions, and I do showcase a few of those in my UI kit, which you can download, letsxd.com/states. So we have this hover state defined, and again, it's all wired up by default. So if I just press play, let me move this out of the way, and I hover, you're noticing that takes place and everything looks really fancy. I can also go over here to the outline state. I can also create another hover state. You wouldn't create it as a hover state, but you'll see what I'm doing in a second. This will be outlined hover. This is where you're getting a little bit more advanced, but for this one, I might want to, let's say this will be the outlined, right? And maybe I'll have this a little bit larger, just like that. I'll change this to white, also change this to view my votes, and I'll make this a little bit larger. Just like that. So now for this case, what you would want to do is if someone hovers over top of one of the states and you want to hover to a hover state, a little bit more complicating, but I'm just kind of showing you what's possible, is you'd go to the outline state, set up an interaction, and it would transition to, what am I doing? Oh, I have it. I have hover over here. Transition to the outlined hover state with auto animate. You don't have to worry too much about the easing options, but now you can hover over this, and you can also hover over this, right? And everything animates really nicely. So a little bit more advanced, but definitely focus on the voting experience for this specific challenge, and you can have a lot of fun doing pretty much whatever you want, whether it's juice or donuts or politics or sports or whatever. Richard said, what if the buttons turns into a donut? I would like to see that. That's your challenge, Richard. Definitely post that in Discord. You can even tweet it at me. I'll take a look. But that will just about do it for today. I'm about to wrap things up. I'm going to run to the airport, hop on a flight to San Francisco. I will be streaming live from there tomorrow, so definitely stay tuned for that. I'll be back for day number 6 tomorrow. Who knows what we'll be covering, but thanks again for watching, everyone. Mahadi and Jack and Richard and Tim and Alvaro and everyone else for joining me. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you all tomorrow.